Hey, it's Jaeru here and welcome to another Sonic game review. Yeah, I finally finished Sonic Frontiers, but as I was preparing to write another lengthy analysis video of our favorite blue blur, Sega surprised us all by confirming that Sonic Frontiers would get free content updates throughout 2023. And since none of that content has been released as I'm writing this and reading this, I quite frankly cannot fully review Sonic Frontiers. After all, the game at its current state is just half complete. Instead, today I will look at what Sonic Team got right and wrong with this game so that we can figure out a conclusive answer to our question in hand. Is Sonic Frontiers actually good? This video includes some spoilers to Sonic Frontiers, so click off now if you don't want to get spoiled. I have something to confess to you all. I quite like this game's story. Yeah, it's cheesy here and there and it has some issues that I will get to later, but it's easily a step up from anything Sonic Team has released since Unleashed. What I really like about it is how seriously it takes itself, and that is reflected in characters' actions this time around, finally. Sonic isn't his usual smart-ass self, and he seems to recognize the danger that awaits him, but he still keeps pushing on, no matter what, to save his beloved friends, even if it means risking his own life. This is the very Sonic we grew to love back in the day. Not this cocky asshole who only throws snarky one-liners around, but a kind-hearted hero with an attitude. A small change in Sonic's tone of voice also contributes to understanding that this person has matured and moved on from his previous adventures. On his former adventures, Sonic frequently approached each challenge with no care in the world about dangers ahead, Bosses being undoubtedly the best example, in which Sonic was captured and tortured for 6 months straight, yet was instantly ready to kick Zavok's butt. In Frontiers, even if Sonic selfishly keeps pushing on and still cracks jokes here and there, he no longer behaves childishly, and I honestly love this character development. I think these cutscenes where Sonic just talks to his friends about life prove it the best. My favorite ones of them all are where Sonic just chills with Knuckles. I mean, look at these cute little facial expressions these two make when interacting with each other. They give away so much personality and help us create a bigger picture of these two's relationship than any exposition dump ever could. You can still very easily tell that these two have a boatload of respect for each other. After all, they are as much friends as they are rivals. When it comes to other characters, Amy is no longer an obsessed fangirl, but rather an understanding and caring individual who loves the world around her and wants to make a change for the better. Whilst some people may not like this direction writers have taken her, you have to take into account that these are more mature versions of our beloved characters that have gone through a lot in their lives. And I believe this is the right course for her. She still has way more personality and thought put into her than any installment has since Unleashed. And phew, thank God I can say the same for Tails. The writers have at last decided to address the elephant in the room, that is Tails' character in modern Sonic games. He has finally regained some self-confidence and has obviously evolved since his last appearance. Hopefully this is a definite turn to better direction for Tails. So let's hope that we see this more mature Tails in upcoming titles, because no one wants to see this worthless failure of a character that he was in Forces ever again. Ian Flynn clearly has a load of respect and love for these characters and seems to know them better than any writer Sonic Team has had in the past 10 years or so. Let's hope that Sonic Team hires him again for future projects, so that Flynn can unleash these characters' full potentials. Moreover, I particularly appreciated that in contrast to practically every recent Sonic game, Dr. Eggman wasn't the main antagonist here. Actually, Eggman plays a rather small part in this game. He gets trapped inside the cyberspace very early on, and most interactions we get from him are these short conversations he has with Sage or these audio logs that we can buy from Big. Yet, he still delivers the best line in the whole game.
Oh. hate that hedgehog. But that doesn't change the fact that he is a formidable adversary. I respect him, but I don't have to like him.
Again, I feel like Ian Flynn understood Eggman's character perfectly, and that's probably why he isn't the butt of all jokes in this game, which is refreshing to say the least. But yeah, I admit, I also adore these references that this game provides. Ian Flynn single-handedly tried to fix the continuity that these games pretended to have, that previous writers had absolutely shattered, and I respect that. No longer do we have to fear the idea of multiple worlds, as seemingly every mainline game and even some spin-offs like Riders games are now canon to Sonic's Earth. One of my favorite references was the one where the dead egg sentinel from Sonic Forces is laying down in Starfall Islands, which kinda hints at that Eggman has had his eyes on the grand prize ever since his world conquest in Forces. Or how about this name drop at Flynn's own OC, Hangul from IDF Comics, who has actually already made appearances in Sonic Dash and Sonic Forces Speed Battle, if you guys didn't know. And obviously the biggest name drop was quite fresh too. Styx is now canon with the mainline Sonic. Styx was previously only seen in Sonic Boom games and the TV show, unless you cared about this Mario and Sonic Olympic Games title, so I am very interested to see if Sonic Team is going to use her character in mainline games or spin-offs in the future. However, I also feel as if Flynn relied too much on these references. They happen a little too often to my liking, as if he tried to answer any complaint that fans have had about Sonic's timeline. Every time these characters talk, they are on their way to make another reference to an earlier game. For example, when Tails has a breakdown that he has become too soft and scared. Meanwhile, Sonic is like,
"Hey, who was it who stopped Eggman from blowing up Station Square, huh? And who broke me out of prison, or saved me from the Deadly Six's trap?"
But thankfully these references weren't that constant to bother me too much from otherwise decent story and other amazing moments we have in this game. And honestly, experiencing this game's story and decent gameplay made me realize that, wow, Sonic is actually fun again. But then there are some issues that I really have with the story. First of it revolves around voice direction in this game's dialogue. This game kinda messes up with existing Sonic lore. Chaos Emeralds were retconned to be extraterrestrial items that ancients brought from their home planet and then used their power to defend against DN's attacks. But why did Sonic and Chip then need Chaos Emeralds for each Gaia temple in Sonic Unleashed? As far as we know, Dark and Light Gaia are creatures that surpass ancients in age and have lived inside Sonic's Earth since the beginning of time. So when were these Gaia temples constructed exactly? With this ancients a retcon, they must have been built after Chaos Emeralds arrived on Earth, since the very Gaia temples required Chaos Emeralds to keep Earth intact. Without Chaos Emeralds, otherwise there would be no need for Gaia temples in the first place. And we also know that this shattering of Earth happens every million or 2 million years, so are ancients that old? It really creates some questions. Throughout the game, Sonic gradually got corrupted by cyberspace energy, which visibly tired him out and eventually succumbed him completely. This freed Amy, Knuckles, Tails, Eggman, and even the End from cyberspace, but practically killed Sonic in the process. This plot point was teased multiple times for the player ever since Sonic freed Amy for the first time. But outside of Sonic's idle animation changing and him getting overly tired in a few cutscenes, it scarcely affects the plot at all. In fact, Sonic's friends freed him out of cyberspace corruption like it was nothing, which makes the entire plot thread seem completely pointless and rushed to the core. Especially since Sonic got rid of any cyberspace corruption he had obtained earlier and shows no signs of it even after accessing cyberspace on Uranus Island. I don't know, this whole corruption plotline just felt like a huge waste of potential to me. I kinda like Sage's character. She is a new character to the Sonic franchise and works relatively well. She's an intelligent, advanced AI who developed a body of its own after Eggman had first created her, or at least that's what I thought about it. At the same time, her character arc kinda sucks. She goes from hating Sonic to liking Sonic out of nowhere because Sonic is cool and does heroic stuff. Given that Sage's help was ultimately required to destroy the Ant, it feels like the writers forced her to change so that she could then sacrifice herself in the end. Besides, not gonna lie, Eggman calling her his daughter is just very cringe. This could have worked if Eggman had enough contact with Sage to allow this type of conversation, but unfortunately most of the character development between these two are hidden behind egg memos rather than cutscenes themselves, and even then it is severely lacking. In any case, I'm looking forward to seeing Sage in future games, as long as the developers don't make her Metal Sonic 2.0 type of character, but someone with a sense of morality as in Frontiers, as that would be refreshing to have for a villain.
It's like how I couldn't handle it after Infinite attacked. One wrong turn and I fall apart.
I will talk about this some other day. Sonic Frontiers is an intriguing game because it is the franchise's first true Collect-a-thon installment. To advance in the game, players have to complete certain objectives where the player has to look for certain items. If you are a fan of Boost Sonic and prefer to go fast, you will need gate gears to unlock more Cyberspace levels. If you are more of an adventure era type of guy, you can complete different platform challenges that usually lead players to the next Chaos Emerald. If you are a combat type of person, there are plenty of foes to battle, but in order to deal more damage, you must purposely play through these platforming sections and puzzles to acquire attack and defensive seeds that boost your combat strength. Or if you just like exploring vast empty landscapes, you can play every single challenge that you come across as they open more of the map for the player to see. No matter which type of gameplay style you like, players still have to go through all of these, which turns almost any given playthrough into a collect-a-thon, no matter if players wanted that or not. But no matter what the player is actually doing in the game, the gameplay loop in itself is very entertaining, and that is because Sonic is very fun to move around. Sonic's moveset has been fine-tuned to almost perfection, and Sonic's movement speed and steering sensitivity are actually finally tweakable in settings, which is actually amazing. Sonic now moves smoothly as butter, even at high speeds, which makes just moving around in the open world quite pleasing. Although Sonic's boost no longer has any aura effects, I actually much prefer it without, since it allows us to fully appreciate Sonic's aesthetic running animation. Additionally, Sonic's boost no longer eliminates enemies upon impact, and it honestly confuses me that it took Sonic Team this long to make this change. Because this is how Sonic's boost should have always been. If Sonic's boost destroys enemies, it turns a boost game into a racing game with supplemental rhythm game mechanics such as quick-stepping. But now as Sonic's boost doesn't harm enemies, the player has to dodge and eliminate them from Sonic's path, which actually increases skill ceiling, as players can decide between maintaining the momentum or stopping it by taking their time with eliminating each enemy. Also, this system does wonders in the open world where players only use boost to get to places faster and utilizes combat moves for attack instead. Additionally, because you no longer get boost energy from eliminating foes or earning rings, boost conservation plays a big part in this game. Especially in Cyberspace, where abilities like updated speed do not apply. Sonic's boost gauge lasts for 16 seconds, and if it runs out, the player cannot boost for the durations that it takes to replenish. However, the player can still keep boosting if they haven't completely exhausted their boost gauge yet, which makes reserving boost gauge extremely important for speedrunners. And again, I feel like this feature should have existed from the beginning, as it adds a much needed skill aspect to boost. In the open world, however, by throwing a flawless infinity sign using Sonic's Psy-Loop ability, players can apply an infinite boost for around 12 hours in game time, but this is just an estimation. Oh, and this animation where Sonic gains an powered up boost with maxed out rings is very cool, as it seems to embrace Sonic's high-speed aura from the movies. But it quite frankly sucks that this animation plays every single time you obtain maxed out rings and therefore pauses the gameplay for a few seconds. And why does the boost still distort the music? It should be like a clickable option that you can disable from the settings. I don't get it. They should just remove the distortion from the music. Sonic's homing attack is lower than in the last few installments, which is disappointing because I really like the chain homing attack from Lost World. In any case, since combat was added onto this game, players do not have to rely on endless homing attack barrages anymore, which is a definite bonus. Homing attack has grown quite stale in previous games, so it is nice to see some variety. However, Sonic's homing attack range is actually ridiculously long, and speedrunners found a way to cancel the homing attack with air boost, which gives Sonic flight ability of sorts. Let's just hope Sonic Team never patches it. Holding a stomp button down while stomping, Sonic performs a long-missed bounce ability that players have been missing for quite some time. Combining Stomp Bounce with Sonic's double jump eases platforming in 2D quite a lot and also makes platforming more fun and replayable than ever before in a Sonic game, at least in my opinion. Oh, and by the way, let's cherish the fact that double jump is actually useful in Frontiers, unlike in a certain game. Frontiers also added fan-favorite drop dash from 2D games, and while it isn't as useful in 3D, since Sonic can boost in this game, it still adds more skill onto the game as players can maintain the momentum with ease after rather slow-paced jumps. Talking about momentum, drop dash is actually one of the only moves in the game that maintains Sonic's momentum when rolling down a hill. But yeah, I really think it should definitely stay in 3D games too from now on. Overall, Sonic's movement options in Frontiers are quite fun and expansive. Anything that adds depth and skill to a game is always welcome. And Frontiers provides plenty of helpful tutorials for newbies, which also makes this game the most accessible Sonic game of all time. Win-win for every Sonic fan. Fishing is a fun mechanic in the game. Yeah, it isn't anything complex, but it is pretty fun to chill to lo-fi music for 30 minutes. This is while Sonic is having time of his life fishing a tire. Why is he so happy? Besides, fishing lets you completely skip most of the exploring and platforming in the open world. So if you don't like that aspect of Frontiers, fishing is always an option. And before we dive into discussing what I particularly didn't like about Frontiers, I have to mention that Cyberspace levels were some of the best parts in the game. Granted, many of them are remixed versions of already existing Sonic levels, but that's also part of its charm. Sonic has altered physics in Cyberspace. He is way slower than in the open world or older games. That also opens a new aspect to the game. Each level in Cyberspace is quite short, and even if some of them are older, recognizable levels, new physics open new ways to complete them. At all times, players have to keep up Sonic's pace if they want to obtain S-rank, so aspects like preserving boost cage and limiting miss inputs become more important than ever, even if these S-rank requirements are piss easy after the first 2 levels. These levels were made for speedrunning, which is an essence to Sonic's gameplay loop, and it really shows. Every route given to the player was perfectly crafted to perfection. However, players are also rewarded with red rings for opening up to their curiosity. Cyberspace levels are peak Sonic game design, and hopefully from now on we will see these 2 aspects of Sonic's gameplay, exploration and speedrunning, split it off into 2 as they should. But first, a message from a friend of mine.
Why, hello there. Jaeru, Storyteller account. So there's 99% of you guys not subscribed. We really gotta change that. Subscribe.
Thank you. Now let's get to analyzing the negative aspects of Frontiers' gameplay. Let's discuss the elephant in the room. Open world kinda sucks in this game. Now, before you hurry to the comment section and leave a dislike, let me explain. See, Frontiers' open world is just a glorified Sonic boost stage in a massive sandbox where you can do whatever you want. And as previously stated, navigating Sonic about this sandbox is a lot of fun. So, what's the problem exactly? Well, there is not much to do in that sandbox. Sonic Frontiers has 4 open islands that players can explore once they advance in the story. Those islands have a variety of challenges and enemies to fight against, but most of the fun from the open world comes from just exploring it in its entirety. That fun factor is expanded with how nice Sonic is to control in this game, but that is pretty much it. It's almost as if the developers knew it was fun to maneuver Sonic around in an open world environment and stuck with that idea since the open world games are the hottest crap in the market right now. But devs did this without really knowing what to place in that open world. So what we have are these random gravity-defying rails placed everywhere. Add some random springs, dash rings and dash pads to then spice things up and call it a day. And that's Sonic Frontiers. It strikes me odd that the ancients, in constructing these structures around Starfall Islands, seem to have had a singular purpose in mind, to cater them solely to Sonic and Sonic alone. I mean, why else would you place these dash pads all over the place? The ancients themselves faster than Sonic? Nevertheless, from a game design perspective, this is just plain bad game design, as these islands should be built in a way that befits Sonic's gameplay, not necessarily designed solely for him. For example, places like Green Hill or City Escape fit Sonic's moveset perfectly, but you could see these places functioning just fine without Sonic being there. Or you could even take another video game character such as the likes of Mario. He could play just fine in these environments. But Starfall Islands? Not by a long shot. These islands were only built for Sonic to run around, not for Sonic to explore an unknown place and taking advantage of the environment. There exists a stark distinction between these two, and this is a major problem. Furthermore, a very notion of an immersive and memorable location is extremely important when creating an open world landscape for a video game. Cities like Los Santos from GTA 5, with its thousands of inhabitants, could exist even after the player has logged out of the game. Meanwhile, Starfall Islands ceases to function as a believable location the instant Sonic departs the place. While one could explain Starfall Islands' emptiness with a lore-specific explanation, that being that it has been abandoned for thousands of years, it defies all logic that ancients would have used modern-day structures like springs, dash rings, rails, and boost pads thousands of years ago, as if ancients built these islands only for Sonic. But I digress. When players start up in Kronos Island, they are greeted with a plethora of new challenges and puzzles. They are evidently very easy, but after all, this game is marketed towards kids, and it is understandable to have easier challenges at the start of the game. But after going through each island in the game and finally reaching Uranus Island, you come to sudden realization we are still doing the same challenges with barely any shift in difficulty. Why does this Quick Steps challenge still give you 80 seconds to complete when it takes 15 seconds to finish? Why do we have hundreds of these copy-pasted platforming sections where this game's horrendous camera is put into a 2D perspective? If you were to force your way to play them in 3D, you would realize how unplayable they are without forced camera angles. And I understand how difficult it is to create fun and diverse 3D platforming, but why are we still forced to play 2D Sonic even in an open world game? Especially when most of these 2D sections are just a rail grinding sludge, where the game essentially plays itself. Anyway, apart from these boring challenges, few boss encounters and some platforming challenges, Starfall Islands don't have much to offer other than a vast, empty land that looks pretty in your Steam screenshots. Though if I have to somehow compliment Frontiers' open worlds, at least devs place these lights directly where the next Chaos Emerald is located, so the player will never get lost when trying to find them. Additionally, some islands at least have some distinguishable landscapes, such as climbable towers on Kronos Island or the wrecked Dead Egg Sentinel on Chaos Island. Now, ever since Sonic franchise moved away from adventure formula, these games have gotten more and more automated. With Boost, Sonic had become so fast that he was nearly impossible to properly control without some sort of automation mechanic. To balance this out, many levels were built around the spectacle of blasting through them. And as a result, those levels lacked clever level design. Perfect example of this boring spectacle type of level design is basically the entirety of Sonic Forces, a game where you cannot even move Sonic around as he automatically returns to a predetermined scripted lane where he keeps running forward. So you may wonder, what does an open world game Sonic Frontiers do about the automation issue in hand? Try to guess. Sonic Frontiers includes a hefty amount of automation. Yes, it isn't as bad as Forces, but geez, you don't need to be handheld this much while playing a game. Dash pads can be found all over the place and they simply direct you to where the level designers want you to go. And there are times when you do not even have to touch your controller for 5 seconds or so in some of these 2D platforming sections. This makes each grinding section feel like a playable movie, but at least the level design has some variety that rewards skilled players. For example, sometimes jumping off a rail rewards players with more rewards or a shortcut to get to places faster. Even then, the majority of these shortcuts utilize dash rings, which adds more automation to the game. Although most of this automation was done to allow easier platforming or to accommodate Sonic's lackluster physics in this game. Yeah, so if you're wondering, Sonic feels great to move around and his moves are quite good, but the physics themselves are very lopsided. Sonic sometimes appears to have actual weight and momentum, even if it only lasts for shorter periods of time. But that's when you realize that you can slide in any direction at instant speeds, no matter if you're going up a hill or not.
Oh, hell no, man. What the fuck?
Here's some examples. Lastly, while this is more of a game design perspective than a physics problem, I will mention it either way. Sonic cannot air boost again without landing on the ground, even after hitting a spring or a dash ring. This same problem applies for Stomp as well, but it is most apparent with air boost. There is also something severely wrong with this game's collision system. Sonic can bump into slightest of edges and go flying, or alternatively cause seizures. When it comes to Sonic's animations, I actually wrote an entire 1000-word long essay on how mediocre I think they are, but given that this video is already quite long, let me summarize my feelings with this one single animation. What the fuck is this garbage? Oh hey, Sonic has an idle animation again, hooray. Yeah, the pinball minigame sucks, we all know it sucks. I have nothing else to really say than a genuine question to the developers of this game. Who thought it was a good idea to add an RNG-based minigame that you need to complete in order to proceed? This puzzle on Kronos Island before the first Titan fight is also so fucking terrible. If you want to avoid losing your sanity, you just need to look it up from YouTube. Also, before I get to discuss this game's combat, why do we have to level Sonic speed and ring capacity one by one? If you have many Cocos on your storage and want to level up your skills, it takes painfully long time, and I really mean it. An easy quality of life change would be to allow us to level 5 or even 10 levels at a time, given that our Coco storage allowed it, so I'm hopeful that upcoming patches would fix this matter ASAP. Combat in this game is pretty good. It feels solid and not too gimmicky. And even better, most open world combat encounters are completely skippable, so players aren't forced to fight through hordes of enemies at all times, unlike in a certain game. Werehog. For basics, Sonic can now punch and kick like in Smash Bros, jump or slide onto enemies, and utilize homing attack for basic damage. Additionally, Sonic can now dodge attacks even mid-air, quick step out of the way, as well as parry essentially any attack. Also, something that I forgot to mention is that you can completely evade any type of damage if you either quick step, double jump, or stomp in the air before landing on the ground. However, Sonic Frontiers gives Sonic a skill tree with a variety of attacks, giving players plenty of opportunities to create skillful combos. The skill tree isn't that large, which means most players are going to have maxed out skill points by the time they enter the last island. But considering that Frontiers was Sonic Team's first attempt at the skill tree, it is more than passable. To make it easier to target each enemy during combat, devs added an enemy lock-on system found in modern RPG combat-heavy games like Dark Souls.
Yeah, I know this is Elden Ring footage, shut up.
But I personally found this system way too inconsistent, and it most of the time just restricts players' view and movement too much to be useful. But maybe you guys found it more useful, who knows. Sonic's attack and defense power can be upgraded by collecting red and blue seeds scattered throughout Starfall Islands. They are usually found as rewards for completing challenges and puzzles, but they can also be found by exploring or by fishing with Pig the cat. And thankfully you level these with the one single animation. The problem with this is, however, that the level scales really badly with the world. You are pretty weak at starting levels, but after leveling anything over 30 honestly just makes the game too easy. I was exploring the last island at level 50 attack and defense power, and was destroying enemies and bosses with few hits. And this is supposed to be the last island. Oh well, I guess it is my fault for leveling to the point that I'm only halfway to max level. However, where this game's combat really shines is in this game's boss fights. For the past decade or so, Sonic games haven't had the best track record when it comes to boss fights. However, I can proudly announce that Frontiers has finally broke the curse. Boss fights are probably the most memorable thing in this game, and no wonder, they slap. Well, apart from the last two, but I will have a word on them very soon. But anyway, since Sonic Frontiers is an open world game, players can find these mini-boss like guardians wandering around the map, Elden Ring style. Aside from the few scripted fights, the player can choose to fight them on their own if they want. This also means that all mini-bosses respawn on their own, so players can have a rematch with them at any time of their choosing. These Guardian boss fights all have their own gimmick that plays around their appearance quite nicely. For example, Squid requires Sonic to run and dodge its obstacles on a purple magic mat till Sonic has closed in on that opens an attacking window. Or how about the shark that Sonic has to ride for a certain period of time before having a chance to attack. How about these fights against ninjas and shinobis that train players to improve their dodge and parry abilities? I really adore these fights as they are simple and provide a bunch of action for the player. While the majority of these battles rely solely on Sonic's DPS, there are also fights where players need to use their platforming ability to platform, such as the Ghost fight. I actually found this one of the best in the game. Ghost constantly trains Sonic's rings, so players have to quickly advance to next platforms to then use Psyloop on these specific statues to chop Ghost's health. I think all of these fights were great, at least ones that I chose to fight, as I didn't go on my way to purposely fight every single one of them. However, if there is anything to complain about, it is that this game's terrible camera hinders almost all of them. Furthermore, some of these fights are reused across multiple islands, which I admit is a little lazy. But at least they are slightly modified each time, so players might still seek to fight them for some extra challenge. How about these Titan boss fights? In each world, Sonic has to collect 7 Chaos Emeralds to turn Super, as these Titans are too strong for normal Sonic to chew. And once I heard that Frontiers was going to have multiple boss fights featuring Super Sonic, I was genuinely intrigued. Super Sonic has always just been used as a final boss gimmick when Sonic has been too weak to face the final foe. The problem is that those final bosses were minigames with altered control scheme, where Sonic or Shadow has to close in to the final boss to land a finishing blow. Time Eater from Generations probably being the best example of this. But we have never really seen normal bosses being tackled with Super Sonic. Well, look no further. Sonic Frontiers got you covered.
It's time to face your fears when your time has come and gone. I'll be the one to carry on, and you can throw me to the wolves, 'cause I am undefeatable.
Sonic Team really thought out a way in which Sonic goes full anime without breaking the already existing gameplay formula. And I think that while it's not perfect, what we got was probably the best implementation of Super Sonic as of yet. Now, I have heard that some people dislike these Titan fights. After all, Sonic takes no damage from Titans' attacks, and as long as you keep comboing your attacks, players will have no problem. so these fights could be seen as playable cutscenes. But I don't really see a problem with this. Super Sonic is supposed to be undefeatable, and Sonic turns Super for the very reason that this is his last resort against these titans, and I think that's all good and dandy. So essentially, Sonic has maintained his control scheme from the open world, but now instead of running, Sonic flies in expected supersonic fashion. These fights go a very specific way. Sonic has to dodge Titans' attacks and get closer to attack them. Sonic can use any fighting combo he has learned from the skill tree, and they work wonderfully. Since each Titan's hitbox is massive, players have plenty of room to execute combos, and each hit feels extremely satisfying to land. Not to mention that the background music absolutely slaps and builds up both hype and motivation to kick the Titan ass. In my opinion, the most enjoyable Titan fight in the game was against the Wyvern. This fight requires the player to utilize the parrying ability against Wyvern's strikes, which then leaves it vulnerable for a counterattack. Parry can be executed by holding down the left and right bumpers on an Xbox controller, and it doesn't have to be timed precisely like in Souls-like games. After figuring this out, the fight became a piece of cake. However, there is something very intriguing in having a fight where Sonic flies through Ares Island in pursuit for this Titan, while the time of day is constantly changing. Though speaking of how easy parrying makes this fight, it presents an opportunity for me to delve into the topic of how easy these Titan battles really are. I started the fight against Wyvern with only 100 rings and could still finish it with a few rings left. This is because a lot of these fights tend to have cinematic and QTE sections where Sonic's rings are not trained at all. Similar issues also persist in other Titan fights, especially this one, where Titans can be vanquished with relative ease, ultimately rendering them somewhat underwhelming. That being said, Knight's last phase is absolutely horrendous. I kinda had to say this because I spent 200 seconds just trying to hit this bastard with his parryable chainsaw. Even then, I wouldn't mind these anime-esque supersonic fights returning in the future installments. However, I cannot be as positive about the last two boss fights in the game. Both of these final bosses are really bad. Yes, I said both of them. Players that have played on easy and normal difficulty don't get to experience the true final boss in this game. But first, let's talk about the last Titan fight, Supreme. This fight is really meh. Previous Titan boss fights were pretty hype and also very fun to fight against, but Supreme is just kinda there. Sure, my overleveling may have harmed my experience, but come on, this is the game's final Titan fight. Supreme barely defends itself and provides nothing new to the table. Compare this fight to any other Titan fight in the game and the difference is night and day. I'm sure that the majority of players were left with the same question as Sonic had.
Is that it?
This is where the game ends for most people. Sonic and Sage fly together to space to defeat the End. Sage sacrifices herself to save the world, and Sonic leaves Starfall Islands with his friends. But if you played the game on hard difficulty, you would know that this isn't actually where the game ends. No. Instead, we are brought to the secret final boss of the game, the End. This boss fight is easily the worst one in the series. I'm not even joking. No other fight is even close. If you're confused why are you staring at Galaga gameplay, let me explain. See, Frontiers had this hacking minigame that has Galaga type of gameplay, where players have to avoid taking damage while trying to destroy the core of the security. These minigames are relatively harmless, fun even though they get quite challenging at the end. But for some reason, Sonic Team loved this minigame so much that they had the audacity to build the entire final boss around it. For the entire game, we are traveling through these 4 relatively empty islands, looking for Chaos Emeralds, exploring cyberspace, and fighting massive titans in epic supersonic boss fights. But then the final boss is an advanced version of a hacking minigame that was used for like 3 to 4 times in the game, including right before the final Titan boss fight. What the fuck? So throughout this fight, the End trash talks the player to no avail and spams the player with millions of nearly undodgeable attacks, and I really mean it, this attack pattern was unhinged. The decision to feature this as a final boss is very bizarre, and it just left me and many others with a sour taste in our mouths. It would have been cool to have a final boss similar to the final boss in Unleashed, where the final phase is the shoot 'em up gimmick and the second phase was the regular supersonic fight that we had grown accustomed to. Well, if anything, at least we didn't have a repeat of Sonic Colossus' final boss for the 4th time in a row. So yeah, I changed my mind. The end fight is 10 out of 10. Masterpiece. Now, if you guys saw my video series on Sonic Forces, you would know that I argued that Sonic Forces looks even worse than games released prior to it. That was a complete embarrassment for Sonic Team, as one of the biggest marketing teams for Forces was that it is running on a new engine specifically designed to enhance graphical look of future Sonic games. But not gonna lie, Frontiers, a game that also runs on the new Hedgehog engine too, looks pretty damn good, most of the time anyway. I would argue that Frontiers is probably the prettiest looking Sonic game, at least the prettiest on the Hedgehog engine too, but the best looking Sonic game? Well, maybe? Not really? I don't know, it's up to you guys to decide. That being said though, I really like that Sonic's footprints now show up in the set. Absolutely groundbreaking feature, guys, we finally made it! However, there's one thing that completely ruins this game's graphical look for me, and that is the infamous pop-in that this game has, and yes, it is as bad as everyone has made it seem. It is rather unacceptable that a AAA game from 2022 has this awful pop-in to the point where sometimes you have to be right next to some objects for them to properly render. I understand that Sonic Team seemed to struggle with optimizing render distance in this game. After all, it would look silly if we could see every gravity-defying rail and platform that just floats in the air, and it would probably destroy the performance for low-end platforms like Nintendo Switch, but sometimes the pop-in is so bad that platforming is almost unplayable. As for graphical options and the game's performance, I guess it is good enough, especially for our current generation of consoles. But Sega continues to neglect PC players with mediocre options and performance. Something Frontiers has de novo, blah 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 blah, you know the drill by now. De novo is meant to be an anti-tamper DRM program, but it instead kills performance in games that have it, especially on AMD hardware. Sega seems to really love adding de novo onto every game they release now, and that is a huge shame. Forces already had it, and I had to suffer that game's terrible optimization at first hand. Similarly, Persona 5 Royal, that was released on PC around the same time as Frontiers, also has de novo, and it often struggles to stay even 50 FPS on crowded areas like Akihabara. And you would think that my PC is more than powerful enough to run these games smoothly. But thankfully Frontiers seems to have a slightly better optimization than Forces did.
Never mind, I was wrong.
However, that doesn't stop me from complaining about the PC port's lack of FPS limit options. Both Forces and Frontiers are locked to 60 frames per second, which means that both of these games are also locked to 60 Hz refresh rate. Obviously 60 FPS should be more than enough for most people, but having a 144Hz monitor, and some people may have even higher refresh rate monitors, it just causes major screen tearing in both of these games. At first, I actually suspected that the Hedgehog Engine 2 is built around the 60 FPS cap. After all, these games are usually run on consoles where 60 FPS is the max available FPS. Therefore, this would explain the lack of refresh rate options as well as FPS limit options. Because if you think about it, in Generations and Lost World, you have an option to go 144Hz in the game's graphics options. But those games did not run on Hedgehog Engine 2 like Frontiers and Forces do. I supported my theory by using HedgeMod Manager, community-driven advanced mod installer tool for PC Sonic games. I noticed that there was a cheat code for Sonic Forces that allows players to unlock 60 FPS limit, and while I used it, Sonic's physics just straight up didn't work, and I got glitches like this. However, in order to do further testing for this video, I actually found out that the physics are actually not affected by the FPS limit at all, as here with unlimited FPS I can play through this stage just fine. This implies that Sega is just getting more and more lazy with their PC ports. After all, most of their sales are probably done on the consoles instead of PC. And other PC ported Sega products like Persona games and Project Diva Megamix Plus have similar issues on PC. So it wouldn't surprise me if Sega is actually getting lazier and lazier. But in the end, Frontiers still looks better than Forces and runs better than Forces, so that's a positive, I suppose. Lastly, let's have a word about Frontiers' music. Sonic franchise is famously known for its excellent soundtracks, not you, and Frontiers is no exception. Sonic Frontiers easily has one of the best Sonic soundtracks produced so far. The variety of different genres this game's soundtrack uses is absolutely stunning, and there are musical pieces here for almost anyone to enjoy. Music in the open world is peaceful, chill music that you could find from games like Breath of the Wild or Elder Scrolls. Songs from Cyberspace vary from EDM to drum and bass, and they sound amazing. Yeah, of course there are tracks that don't land as well as others, but some of these tracks like Flowing, Transparent Highway, and Ephemeral are absolute timeless bangers. Special shout out to Digital Cave, a heavenly remix of Sonic 06's End of the World theme. Huge props to the sound team for arranging a song for every single 30 Cyberspace levels. But alas, we can all agree that crown jewels of Frontiers' soundtrack are the vocal songs that play during the each Titan boss fight. Like seriously, all the artists involved went hard with these songs. All of these seem to express Sonic's ongoing thoughts during each event where these songs play, and they significantly bump up the hype factor for each Supersonic fight by a mile. But out of all of them, Undefeatable, which plays during the first Titan fight, is the best one, probably due to its very hype lyrics. But yeah, overall I have nothing bad to say about the soundtrack, but even with multiple banger tracks that it has, I would say that Sonic Adventure 2's and Sonic 06's soundtrack still beat Frontiers' soundtrack for now, but I may change my opinion as my music taste changes every other day, so we shall see. But yeah, that's what I have to say about this game. Is it good? Well, you all probably noticed that I had plenty of negative things to say about this game, but keep in mind that I am quite passionate about Sonic franchise. I became a Sonic fan around when Generations released, and I have been very disappointed with each release that then followed it. There's nothing more that I would want as a Sonic fan than have an amazing game, a fun game to play. So of course I don't want these games to suck, but at the same time it is quite easy to find even the smallest tidbits that I can critique. If all the Sonic games successfully had features that Frontiers delivered inferiorly at, of course I'm going to mention it, for example Sonic's animations. And Sonic Frontiers is not a flawless game by any means, it has some major flaws that need polishing out. But even then, I found myself enjoying the game. No matter how empty the open world was, I had fun just messing around on it. I had fun running through Cyberspace levels. And Frontiers also got plenty of things right that all the Sonic games had failed to accomplish at. In the end, these positive aspects surpass negative aspects of Frontiers, which heightens the game's value in my personal opinion. So yes, I would definitely recommend Frontiers. It is not the best Sonic game ever made by any means, and I still wouldn't urge any of you to buy it at its $60 price tag. Then again, honestly, $30 to $40 sounds reasonable to me. What a Sonic team really just has to adapt to the next game is just get the good things from this game, because having Sonic in an open world, it's just basically infinite potential there. The Sonic team just has to unleash that potential. They just have to provide us a more difficult game that is replayable, memorable, and fun. Because fun is what video games are all about. Just hold on to things that Frontiers got right and improve on what it didn't. With that, we should have one of the best open world games ever released and one of the best Sonic games ever released. I am expecting the next mainline Sonic game to be really good, so do not fuck this up, Sonic team. That said, thank you all for watching and listening.